we need to move on to some other criminals. And on page 2, the Mirror is reporting that £6.7 billion worth taxpayer money was lost to fraud and error under Rishi Sunak's COVID schemes. It would have been more than enough, says Labour, to pay the wage bill of every single one of the country's 164,000 police officers with 200 million spare. In other words, it was a busload of money, and it was either wasted or stolen on the Tory watch. Now, compare and contrast that to a story on page 9, where a pay rise for nurses is called by the Tory Transport Secretary unaffordable by Mark Harper because, and I quote, there simply isn't the money. Now, Alison, let's put the brass neck of these chancellors to one side for a moment. Even under Labour, there would have had to have been a COVID scheme, something like Rishi's. There would have been some fraud. There would have been errors. Is this really the totally Tory cock-up that it appears to be, or is it just governments in a panic?
Well, I mean, I think what happened here is clearly extraordinary. So much public money was absolutely just thrown out there. I was talking to somebody the other day who was saying that they knew someone who'd got the what they call their bounce back kitchen, which is their new kitchen they bought, a very nice kitchen they bought. Out of the money, they effectively fiddled out the bounce back loan scheme. So there's been a lot of people, I'm sure lots of people listening here will know people who did very nicely out of it. And yes, obviously we needed that cash injection and we needed Eat Out to help out, although maybe we didn't need that precise scheme. But we needed things to put some energy back into the economy when it was really struggling while coming out of lockdown. But in all situations, there has to be those checks and balances put in place that don't need to be particularly cumbersome, because there's lots of things that can be done. And there are lots of experts out there in the world today that work in banking and in compliance who could have been brought in and put around a table to make sure that those safety nets were in place. To make sure, because we've already seen that all the terrible things that went on in the protective equipment contracts. We saw that horrendous story last week about Baroness Moan and the amount of money she filled out the country. It looks like there were a lot of people who deliberately took this country for billions of pounds at a time when we needed it most to try and get ourselves back on our feet. And those people, A, there should have been more checks and balances in place, didn't get their hands on the money. And B, the idea that we're just saying, oh well, them's great, and just letting them walk away with it, and we're not pursuing them with every inch of the law. So I can pretty much guarantee if it was like you or I, we've done something like speeding or whatever, they'd have been all over us. The very idea that all this money is just like been allowed to walk out the door and no one's even trying to pursue it actively seems extraordinary.
It does seem bizarre. I can remember when the schemes were set up that there were people warning at the time that they weren't tight enough to be properly administered and chased. Although I did look into trying to see if I could get any kind of bounce back thing for my business, and I didn't qualify because I was just too small and unimportant.
Yeah.
Although of course,
and that's another really interesting point. There was a lot of self-employed people at that point who really struggled and didn't get any help at all. So it was, really difficult. Yeah,
it was pretty hairy. Although obviously, even the money when it goes in fraud and error, so if it gets spent in the economy, someone benefits. The kitchen fitters obviously did well in some places. Now, Dave says, where's the money coming from? Or Dave and Janine, sorry, where the money coming from to pay for nurses, etc.? Because I ain't paying no more tax. We're all going through this, but we all can't get a pay rise. No, lots of people are trying to, and it's worth pointing out that when the public sector gets a pay rise, usually that's followed by one in the private sector too. They do go together. So when the nurses go out and strike, it does actually, if they get a higher pay rise, make some difference elsewhere in the economy. So it does kind of benefit everybody to some extent.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be a really, really difficult few months. I mean, we've got rail workers, civil servants, health workers, not just nurses now, it's across the health service voting on it. There's all sorts of industries where people are really struggling, and I mean, there's no doubt that if we could find a situation whereby there was less inequality in society, so everyone who felt that they were really under the cosh could benefit more rather than just the fewer and fewer people that we see at the top of the tree, that would lead to less of this sort of pitting against each other. So, well, they can't have it because I'm not getting it, which is a completely natural reaction because everyone's really feeling the squeeze, and we need to kind of really change that. So everyone feels that there's benefits more broadly.
Yeah,
It's
that
a
would be
tough
nice,
balance.
wouldn't it?